This is a building query for March 12th, last week, Open Data Week. It's just the team today, and so I think we're going to focus on talking about a release, upcoming release, and how that supports the ultimate goal of uniting what we've been calling Querymatic with what exists today, Query Cloud, in a single query experience.
Absolutely. Thank you. I hope you don't mind if I take over, Rico. Is that cool?
Go for it.
Okay. I took the liberty. We're talking about a release of Query Core. I took the brief liberty of running our changelog generator. So here's the latest release that is public. And Dustin's making faces because this is going to hurt. Last time we cut a release,
it's going to be overwhelming.
Yeah, was the 12th of, is that October? I'm bad at months. Yeah, real bad. And then everything where you see the green bar beside is new. So the green bar starts there. This is all stuff that's happened. And some of these represent like almost a month of work, like improved save performance using bounded memory is still not in a public release. But I personally worked on that for like at least 2 weeks. So this is a lot of work in here. There's a lot of fixes. There's a lot of changes. There's a lot.
So not to diminish the amount of work, but some of this is like there's a giant change happening that's broken down into pieces, right?
Yes, we're actually doing our jobs the right way now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to talk? I mean,
Dustin. Oh no, that was all.
Okay. I mean,
there's been a lot of like. I guess I'll talk a little bit. There's been a bunch of kind of more architectural changes happening, and like there's certainly a lot of work, but it doesn't mean that they're kind of like orthogonal. Like it's not like they're going to have a big different feel for users. I guess that's what I'm getting at. There are things that are more changing how things work at a more fundamental level in order to, in some cases, fix things, but in some cases just make it easier to build upon that foundation. But yeah, it's still certainly a lot of changes, exciting stuff, in my opinion.
I think you're totally right. And I think that's a perfect segue to like talking about our next release, what it should be and how much to include in it specifically around the things that users are going to see. And I think that ink has been spilled on this topic already. Let's see if we have, I have been working on a query version 0.10 trashing issue that was filed in April of 2020. This has been a long time coming in a lot of ways. We had a lot of things in here, but there's a lot that's happened since and a lot that's been fixed since. And I've been starting to go through old issues and like a lot of things are actually already addressed and solved, which is really neat. Dustin.
Can you scroll down to that bolded list? I wanted to see how much of that is actually, some of this is already done, right?
Yeah. Running SQL, done. Faster save is done. Progress bars, done.
Partially, it's not there for save yet, but it's there for push and pull.
Oh, good point. Yeah. So only save is missing from that. Pushing to remotes, done. JSON API, that's
in progress.
And I think is the really big thing to talk about here. And the just like, let's just completely do one big break of the JSON API is what I want to kind of get at today. Introducing apply, we did, done, it's in. Robust configuration, we've done that as well.
The FSI part of apply is not there yet. I don't know if that's it's not a huge priority, but it is one of the original motivations for why we wanted to apply.
Yep. Yeah. And I don't think that it's super important given our current emphasis on FSI. We're currently thinking a lot more about automation than we are about file system integration. Yeah, so stuff like that. Remote hooks and retention strategies definitely did not land, but that's okay. And then we did a lot of these things that you talked about, Dustin. The remove changes and the export, render, and update combinations and fixes. Basically moving everything from export into get. So a lot of that's done. Did you have a point before I move on to the milestone?
The part you highlighted is like not landing. That was actually for 011. So.
Oh snap! Yeah. So this is future work, anyways. Yeah. So progress is being made there. We have, so a lot of these things are actually in. And then if we look at the milestone for V10, a lot of this surrounds the API. Secondary location for private keys, I'm just going to move this for now. I agree that we should be backing our private keys, but I don't think that it's a right now thing. And then this transition away from repo.canonicalized data set ref, I looked at this. This is nearly finished. This is like it's isolated to the point that it's effectively done, but we won't close the issue until we actually delete the code, because that issue says delete the code. So I think the big thing to talk about here is I think we should be cutting a V10 release. I think we should be cutting it soon. And I think it should be when we finish. The big user-facing change should be the performance improvements of query, now that it actually includes, you can actually save a 10 gig data set and it's just a matter of time, not memory or computer speed. And we should break our API in a big way, document it in a big way, and have that be, okay, cool. The big trend, the reason we gave it a V10 label instead of a V914 is this massive break to the API. It's not semantically versioned because we would theoretically need to be going from like a 1 to a 2 to actually denote that break, but it's small s semantically versioned. So the question that I have is, does anybody feel like there's anything that's like, there's a lot of things that secretly come with this, as we've been saying, that like there's a whole series of discussions around making query core multi-tenant, dispatch, and all of these things. But I think if we keep the framing of just like user-facing changes to our command line feature set, does anyone feel like there's anything missing that like desperately needs to go into the next release? We can't live without it. You know, that's
not quite missing from the release per se, but as far as user-facing functionality, like how do we put desktop into this conversation? Like we can do a release in the back end without desktop, but does that mean it's going to be not possible to run desktop at head? Like how are we planning on doing that?
I always go to unmute and then I just trigger the autofill on my face. Anyways, I think that we should, the final authority on this is Casey, but I am of the mind that we should break the API, fix it for desktop, and cut the release for core once we know that the fix for desktop is possible, and then cut a desktop release. I don't think we need to change a ton about desktop, but we should keep a policy of running the latest version of query core.
Yeah, one other thing that's, we never released a version of desktop that has change report in it.
Yeah.
We like got to the finish line of that and then never fully pulled the trigger because we had other things that we were having to do. So I would have to look back, but any desktop changes we might look at that and go, oh shit, we forgot to do X, Y, and Z for change report. There's like a decent chance about that. So it might be a little bit more work than just ensuring that all the API endpoints point to the right things and consume things the right way. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, totally. What I would suggest with the change reports is that we hide them behind a feature flag, and because I think we should be migrating them up into the unification efforts that we're making and bringing change reports with us to the new greener pastures where we have ideally fewer React code bases. But if on desktop, we just put it all behind a feature flag and then focus on getting the API to function properly, I think that will allow us to ship a release without also having this question of like, we need to do this feature to also get this desktop thing out to like, I see no reason to do that to ourselves until we're ready for change reports. Does that work? Yeah, because I definitely want change reports.
So.
I don't want them to slow down the core release, which a lot of other things are kind of pivoting around. Cool. Any other features that we think desperately need to, like, we can't call it code 10 without that?
We need to make sure that prove is like working and doing the reasonable thing, which could be tricky. But yeah, like the current release prove will appear to work, but is actually not breaking, but like making old data inaccessible. It would be good to at least have a story around for when the release happens, like just like a story, like just a way to explain what proof does and like how it'll modify your existing data sets and stuff like that. And part of that will involve pushing that functionality into cloud. Part of it also just making sure that like, pushing, polling, saving, etc. continue to function right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point around our private key management and like some of these prior bug mitigation strategies.
Yeah, I don't think we need the full like decentralized solution in place, which is what something we'll want eventually. But
Mm-hmm.
like the V1 version where you can run proof and basically you can run query on multiple machines using the same cloud connected account, that should have like the MVP working, I guess is the way to put it.
And we should have a thought in place on how we're going to do the permission stuff. And I think a lot of that actually is already merged into master, but what we should do is like a thorough smoke test review that says, cool, is this actually going to behave the way we think it is? And by smoke test review, I mean the Python code that you've been writing, Dustin.
Yeah, I mean, it might also be good to like have, multiple people running proof in like a second account, and then just making sure they can use query for like normal everyday stuff, and it'll still work.
Yeah. So if we don't do a formal release candidate, we should at least do that before cutting a release. Add that to our checklist. Cool. That's good. Yeah. I'm of the mind that like so I think I want to pay attention to the API and take a look at it, a brief look at it as a team, just to talk through, because I do have a bunch of really big proposed changes to the way that the API is actually glued together, in the sense of like, not technical work, is mainly just the endpoints and how they're organized, to make it easier to document. I'd like to work through that. And I think that the proof stuff is the key management stuff is like a big thing we should cross our T's and dot our I's on. Beyond that, anybody else have anything else that needs to go in? No? Okay. This is good, because I think what this will allow us to do is really like get a release at the door and get us focused on this sort of like API breaking set of fixes, and allow us to sort of get back into a much more frequent release cycle, ideally. Chris.
You said multi-tenancy is actually in this. Does that mean that I can somehow migrate my many query profiles that all live in different folders to not have to switch in the same way with like an environment variable?
I think that's a perfect way of asking the question, should we land genuine multi-tenancy as the part of the O10? I think that would be, yeah, Dustin?
I don't think we're there. I don't think we're ready for that yet.
I think we're very close, but I agree. I don't think we're there quite yet. I think it would be the following release.
I'm worried about like commands running at once, or one command running longer than we think it is, just because of how the plumbing works. And there's a lot of places in the code that assume there's a single owner of the repo that will probably not do the right thing if that assumption's ever violated. Mm-hmm. It needs some like hardened testing, I would say, before we can get there. But like, I think it's something we can get to sooner rather than later, especially with all the refactoring that's been happening. Mm-hmm. But I think putting it as a requirement for O10 is too much.
Yeah, but I think that's true. To answer your question with a little more nuance, Chris, if you were to make new profiles from scratch and you were operating on a local machine, I think the chances go up. But I would definitely label that as experimental for now. But definitely a lot more doable now than it was a week ago. And I think would be, if we focus on getting this API set of fixes, we can then turn our attention to that exact question, which I think is the most important thing to do next, personally. Being able to actually, as you're saying, Dustin, making sure that everything is safe for concurrent access or concurrency safe generally, all of our subsystems, and then going through, there are at least 46 places in the code base that call repo.owner, and we have to turn that to less than that. Asmir.
I I think we need to make a distinction between like multi-profile and actual multi-tenancy, because what Chris is asking is more like multi-profile, and then you like specify you're either one or the other, but you still run like a single user through the whole stack. Querymatic is more concerned about true multi-tenancy because you need to like multiplex two or more users at the same time.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really good point. Because it doesn't have as many of the problems that Dustin's bringing up. It's if you're logging in as one user doing a thing, logging out, logging in as another user doing a thing, logging out. That's a different set of problems than user A and B are both at the same time trying to do something.
Related but separate problems.
Yes. And you get it a lot when you're running transform scripts because they run long. I do it to myself a lot now with Query Connect running.
Yeah, I mean, it's even possible if it's possible to like accidentally save, twice if save is like a long running process.
Yes.
As far as like, what's needed to get the code to be like multi-profile aware, like I'm just thinking of like Logbook right now has also like a concept of owner in addition to like the profile store. So there's like a couple of places like that are kind of deeply embedded in how the code works, that they're on their way to being fixed. But yeah, I reassert my earlier claim. Not quite there yet.
Totally. Yeah. Okay. So Chris, terrible answer to your question, but a real one. So with that, can we move to the API conversation? Is anybody going to be upset if I walk us through just some set of changes to our API route layout? Cool. All right. And then I think we can start calling that a 010 release and call 010 shipped as soon as all of those are fixed. A lot of this shouldn't be surprising because this is actually work that's been happening for a long time. Asmir's been sort of leading this. Dustin's been following with dispatch, and Casey's been following with dispatchification of Asmir's work. And so this has been an all hands effort. But if we look at, where is this pull request? I have a pull request open that is trying to just be the modification of the API endpoints. And I really want to think, ask us to think about this from the perspective of documentation. It's really hard to look at this just as a diff, so I'm going to show you the like actual file, or more importantly, I'm just going to show you my notes file that talks through some of these endpoints. Let me get a file out of this so I can make it big. I think we should think a little more formal, like because we've all started to settle on the API as the thing that we should look at. I would like to start grouping together operations in a very similar manner to the way that when you're on the query CLI, if you type query, you get these things organized by dataset commands, working directory commands, network commands, and other. I think we should basically have a really similar sort of like top level grouping for our API endpoints when we're talking about them. So these are all dataset commands. And you'll notice that all of these things generally work with datasets. Dustin?
Would it be too disruptive to split up dataset, or is that like a crazy ask? Like, is there too much in it, or is it good that it's kind of like the central place for like the main functionality? I don't know, just kind of more curious on thoughts on that.
That's a genuine question. And I think that's something we should put to the group. What do others think? I'd call attention to like DS apply, DS diff. Is that should it just be a diff command instead of?
I mean, just to put my own thoughts into it real quick, and I'm not convinced either way because I don't want to do all that work because it seems like potentially messy. But there does seem to be a lot in dataset, and we could consider like things that are just querying data in different ways. Like I'm thinking get, SQL, render, changes. Those are all things that are just like read only, like getting stuff out. Whereas things like save, remove, rename, apply, sort of. There's like a bunch of things that are like actually manipulating your repo, right? And like maybe that's a way we can have a distinction. I don't know. Maybe list is different because it's talking about everything, whereas most other commands are talking about a single data set at a time. It's something that's been in the back of my mind, and I haven't come to any strong conclusions. I don't know.
what I just looked at by reading this was like lists seems like it's not the same thing as a thing that it seems one level above, because it's many data sets, but it's still dealing with the data set thing. So I don't know, but that was the one that caught my eye. But I also think it's like, it's beautiful that, I don't know, I like it. I think it's beautiful that they all have the same, prefix, and I can kind of run down the list and try and figure out what each one does. And they're very different from access and peer, for example. So it doesn't bother me.
I also have a question. Oh, sorry, Asner.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Like, are we talking about splitting them apart just at the API level, or are we talking about all the way down the stack?
Just at the API level. Sorry, Dustin. Dustin, then Asmer.
I was thinking of it as API/lib.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Lib and API, or just API?
Asmer.
My thoughts are in a similar vein. I don't necessarily think we should like start chunking it out into like 3-4 paths, like blocks. But there are definitely routes that are misplaced. I think into the dataset like package. Remove, for example, was treated as a remote route, and it might still be, but it depends like what you feed to it. So it goes like both ways. Also, render feels a bit icky and feels more like generating a preview, but this is just for the README part. So that path, like as a whole, feels a little bit off in terms of like what it delivers. Like it just serves the README. SQL, I don't know. It feels like a completely one-off thing and so on. So I think there are things that are not really at home in the dataset package in general. And if we would do split stuff off, I would definitely split them also at the lib level. So like at least rearrange them.
I think it's relatively trivial to do the rearranging now, which is great, but it's, the real, I think really, I like the way that that we're talking about this. We're just trying to like think about this from the perspective of someone who's coming to our API with no experience, and like what's the grouping that makes sense, and we should think that way first. This is kind of like a DX developer experience exercise. Yeah, and so like remove being remote or local is interesting.
But I mean, is the theory of get supposed to be the same way, where it can potentially get something from the registry? Like,
yeah. I think the broad answer to this question is, when we're thinking about query, we decided a long time ago to sort of just obfuscate the network and say that whether it is or is not a network request is something you can control with configuration, but by default, query resolves stuff for you and removes. And if you ask to remove something on a remote, it's going to assume that you're doing a networky thing. I at first was really against that design philosophy and have found it really hard to get around it without adding too much complexity to the front end of describing what something does. Others?
A question, where is pull on this list? Because it's in our coding, it's a data set method, but it's really both data set and remote, the same way that remove is data set and remote, and some of these other things.
It actually was in the remotes package, and I removed it with the RPC to HTTP refactor because it wasn't used. Like it was like it was there, but it's unused code. That code.
I think rename might also become something that is remote aware, even though I think currently it's only local.
Yeah.
So
the truth of the matter is, like, query is a distributed platform. It's offline first, but the network is going to get involved at some point. And I think if you use the network as the like delineation, you're going to lose your mind. At least that's been my experience.
I think.
Go ahead, Dustin. Yeah.
Just a random thought. Like maybe the way to think about the grouping is by what it is you're managing, right? Like you're working with data sets versus you're working with peers down below, versus you're working with something like permissions, right? like working
Mhm.
directory is a good example where everything there is, you're talking about stuff on disk, right? It's a
Yeah.
different kind of mode. So it's not, yeah, you're right that the network, non-network distinction isn't always clear. Yeah, I don't know.
Mhm. Chris, did you have a thought?
I was just going to advocate for the users who maybe are less interested in like programmatically working with, programmatically manipulating their data sets and like removing things and creating new versions, but are much more interested in just give me like the SQL queries of the world and
Right.
things I'm trying to actually like build something with utility on top of this API, which is very different than like the actual, steps of moving data sets around and renaming them and adding new versions to them and things like that, which are lower level, or yeah, I guess lower level. Like
Mhm.
I'm advocating for the like useful data extraction API versus the like manipulate my query resources API.
Right. And so in that case, okay, so here, let's put that to a concrete proposal. Would you be cool with, or would you think it would be an improvement to take off the DS prefix to /SQL and just have it be, I want to do SQL? I don't understand data sets, but I understand SQL.
Reminds me of Cardo's SQL API, which is its own thing with its own name. Then there is also another API for like doing other stuff, but SQL is its own thing. So that sounds reasonable to me.
Others agree? Sounded like you were leaning that way, Asmer.
I'm fine with it. I mean, no objections. I don't know, generally prefixing all this stuff, like it feels more weird than helping. Might be because we're from the inside and we know like which endpoints kind of target what. So that might be like my tunnel vision here. Maybe just merge the remotes with the dataset package, because those two are just kind of like doing the same in regards to datasets. Like,
Yeah, I guess they are serving data sets.
I just don't know like what's the logic behind splitting them. If it was like all the remote routes that just change stuff on the remote, like they do something that writes, and then everything else is in DS, for example, but that's not the case. So
yeah, I think what you're saying
like,
really
how
shows
do we
up with
decide like what's remote, what's DS?
I think it's remote is everything that is actually like, as an example, part of the initial motivation for like this remote endpoint is like things like log sync and desync need to exist, but actually aren't ever really invoked by humans. They're here and they have to be here because that's how servers talk to each other. And like the same thing with remote refs. Remote, where this really falls apart is like push and pull, which really are kind of stuff that you could see being invoked. Dustin.
For desync and log sync, like those kind of feel like different things than the rest of the, because the rest of these are like commands that say like query desktop is hitting on like the same machine or something, right? Whereas desync and log sync are things that you want, they're endpoints that you're reaching out to. Of course, they do exist when you have a node running in remote mode, but it's like it's a different category of endpoint, I guess.
Yeah, they have a different audience.
They're server.
Yeah, server to server.
They're meant to receive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. They're not like an endpoint that runs a command.
In OAuth parlance, this is like the two-legged OAuth, like it's server to server versus three-legged, which is server user.
Okay.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's the case, but I'm really, you might notice a theme here. I really want one thing instead of two things whenever we can have it. And it's, I understand that there's like there isn't really a need for this, but there might be. And I don't see any reason to create like a whole separate API for desync and log sync. Like I'd rather just have an annotation that says, this is largely used by servers. You probably don't need to hit this.
I wasn't even trying to recommend that. Just
okay.
Just pointing out that they are kind of serving a different need.
Yeah, and I think that's was some of my original intent behind this like remote prefix was like, look, this is stuff that you generally don't need because it's servers talking to servers, but that's not true of push and pull.
Of push and pull, right?
Yeah, And I think that's what Asmer is bringing up is like, what is the distinction between remotes and DS? Like,
I just noticed this looking at config yesterday. It's kind of like remote is being used in two different ways. So sometimes as a verb, sometimes as a noun. So right, there's actions you take that involve going to a remote, and then there are actions you are fulfilling as a remote. Right. So like in the config, you have a section called remote and a section called remotes. And I'm never a fan of two things that act very differently, but just have a single letter S at the end is the difference. But that's besides the point. One of them is defining which remotes you're talking to and like its configuration for that. And the other is saying, I am a remote and here's my own settings for what I'm accepting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's part of the mix-up we're discussing here.
You're totally right. Because if you take your logic and apply it here, like we can basically say these two are, basically all of this is I'm acting as a remote. Yeah.
Yeah, the top two are verbs where they're saying these are things I do. I push and pull from a remote, right?
Yeah.
And then the rest is here are things that I send to a remote to get info back. Like I want to get feeds from a remote over there. I want to get search on a remote over there.
Yeah. Yeah. So these should be moved. They're different things. Excellent. They shouldn't be removed. They should be moved. Did I say remove or did I say move? I don't know. I don't have a brain.
It should be moved again.
Yeah.
Removed. Moved.
I see what you did there.
So, okay, so we know this needs to be moved. I'm going to put asterisk here. And Chris, off the top, you seemed like, okay, cool. You're interested in the grouping where it's helpful. SQL feels like it needs to move out, basically out of the group. Maybe this DS group is really the problem, and we should chat about that. Because like, where my head's at is like, my desire to refactor this is to turn this into just push and pull, right? And I don't know how do others feel about that? Like,
I'm worried we should either just an idea, not assertion, maybe, but I feel like either everything should have some grouping to it, or there shouldn't be any, or at least should be minimized. Like, yeah, I feel like it's a bigger deal to kind of go all in if we're going to be doing that. I don't know.
It's a compromise, right? Like, we want to design something that helps somebody leverage their way through the system. And for me, like this original grouping of like, this is stuff that is generally about data sets. Yes, it's weird, but what am I rendering? I'm rendering a data set. What am I saving? I'm saving a data set. What am I listing? I'm listing data sets. Like they're all stuff to do with data sets. What am I doing? I'm creating an access token. That doesn't have anything to do with data sets. I'm doing something else. I totally agree that like there's so much merit and value in having just like SQL. I know what SQL is. I don't know what DS SQL is. That's something fancy and new, and that irritates me. And as we've said, there's the challenge with data sets is like tweets, they are our atomic unit, and they kind of get everywhere, and like figuring out what is and is not in the data set is really difficult. And I think that's even highlighted by like, everybody seems down with the peer grouping. Yes, no? Yeah. It's like really easy to like, oh yeah, that's the P2P stuff. And we should definitely put that in a box that lives in a different place from the other things. Casey.
I mean, at minimum, I think that push, pull, and SQL belong under the dataset thing. But yeah, I don't know that I have a full thought. I just have like gut feelings. Like if data set is, if you're pushing and pulling data sets, is that, no, I think that having the DS prefix on SQL push and pull is going to be easier for people to reckon about when they look at it rather than just SQL or just pull. I think the prefix tells you something about, if it gives you context to what's happening, I think it's important. You're SQLing a data set, right? You're not, are you SQL querying one data set, or are you SQL querying a bunch of data sets? That might be different, but you are pushing and pulling a data set.
That's
Yeah.
I fully agree that push and pull belong with the DS prefix. Something I'm starting to think is like actually related to what Casey just said, where SQL can use multiple data sets at once, right? Diff also works that way. Like it makes me think, should there be like a query prefix for all things that are accessing data?
Yeah.
Changes, diff, SQL.
Yeah. SQL works on not just data sets, but the body of one or more data sets specifically, right? There's no SQLing there's no SQLing the README.
Yeah.
So it's a little different. But it's a little different than like, well, no, diff also is doing the same. Well, no, I guess you can diff. Can you diff the other parts of the other components, or just diff the body?
You can. Query diffs everything by default, and almost everybody universally gets really irritated by that fact.
People really want to diff the bodies only.
Just the bodies. They do not care about diff the meta. Yeah.
Now that you say it that way, then it is much more like SQL than the other ones. So,
which is interesting because apply has the same concept, right? It can import multiple data sets.
Yeah, right. Because these are things that are operating. They're kind of higher level. I think I don't know about remove, but certainly those four. They're kind of like they're asking aggregate questions, I guess. Right? Maybe we want an ag prefix. How many letters of aggregate do you need before it becomes readable? What? Aggro. Prefix?
Aggro. Yeah, we'll just slash aggro.
I don't know. Something like that, to be serious. Like, I don't know, do we use slash query? Is that where we finally use the name of the product as a verb? Yeah.
I mean, that was my first impulse when whoever brought up that it is something on, that was my first impulse when whatever started the thing. Never mind. I think query could make sense. I'm not married to it though, because it's like a strong statement.
This is pretty.
Maybe to the nose. Yeah. It could also just be Q, like Q for query spelled either way. And then does list also belong in there? I would ask.
Yeah.
It's the final aggregator, right?
The final aggregate. No, that's not.
Whereas everything else then is going to be about a single data set at a time, which I think really makes a lot more sense. Put Q for the prefix for all 6 of those and see how that looks. I would
see. I was thinking that the query parameter for the SQL. I don't know actually what is the query parameter for the SQL, because is it Q?
Yeah.
Then you have Q/Q. Anyway, it doesn't matter, but
I mean, like Google search pioneered using Q as the search term, which became like a common search engine thing.
We should definitely copy their behavior. Maybe we'll get the same fate as Google.
I'm not married to this idea. It's just something I wanted to investigate.
Personally, I'd do this. I mean, this prefix isn't really giving us any value, is it? So just don't have one.
I mean, I also thought like data also felt maybe it's different than data set because it's actually like data. But no, list, that doesn't work for list. That works for SQL and diff maybe, but not list.
Could be, we're not using collection anywhere, but that's something we keep bringing up. Like, I don't know.
Could be collection. Yeah, that's it. That sort of gets that aggregate notion. Yeah.
I think a couple more iterations and we'll end up at the original like route that we had.
Just to get back to.
But a slight tangent to this. I think apply feels like the only odd one out from here, because it's strictly like apply what or to who or something.
Mhm.
Like when it was like prefix with ds apply, still apply what, but
But at least you're
like
getting a data
transform
set.
felt
Yeah.
more real, like ds transform, then you know like what it's kind of dealing with.
Hmm.
I think it's more like a port from our CMD legacy because we had like, and there it makes sense because you say query CMD query apply, and then you give it a transform, and then to what, and then that makes sense. But now you like, unless you look at the params, you don't really know what you're applying and to what you're applying.
Yeah, this is in no way helpful, but yes, I totally agree. The command that I was hoping to display was just, yeah, you just give it a star file, and that's, I agree with you totally, Asmir. I also think that having a, like the initial thinking for apply was to remove to
Yeah.
decouple some stuff in save. And so like save and apply are related concepts, and the idea that those would be in different groups is strange. But I really do like the idea of having these just be sort of top level things, because they feel very executive function, right? What do I have? Show me my list of data sets. What do they have? Show me their list of data sets. Do something useful. Query this entire knowledge graph. That seems like a good thing to have there. And then diffs and changes. I think, you know, we got into this. We haven't gotten over that hill in a real way yet, but diffs and changes, I think, are going to be major value adds.
I'm kind of okay with this.
I think it's a benefit to have these things grouped together in DS and sort of move you down one level and say, hey, if you're going to be doing data set stuff, it's this.
Also, unpack is sort of it's only used for like zip handling, right? Like it's not really, it's kind of a pseudo endpoint. It's like it's a little more plumbing than anything.
Yeah, and I think I would encourage us to say in the course of documenting this to not think about the frequency of use so much. The important thing here is the clarity of the documentation starting from the endpoint, the label itself, right? Like what we want to be able to do is we want to establish patterns that users can grab onto and never betray them, right? And so if in this case I think we want to have, these are all about data sets, and we need to sort of establish what that means and be consistent about it. So the debates that we're just having about apply in or out of this group, I think, are really the vital debates. But I think using this like prefixes of organizing logical subsystems so that users know, hey, you're doing pure stuff that's over here. That's you don't need to be concerned. This whole section of documentation, like you can imagine the doc site sidebar where we'd say like peer-to-peer commands, and then we would list just these ones. And then like dataset commands, we would list these ones. And we would actually probably call these query commands and like put that as the top level like thing and explain it that way. Maybe these need to be grouped in their own, because I think one of the challenges here is if we also have this GAC, right? Just to move this stuff.
Prefix the GAC with like an underscore and just say those are kind of like obscure or internal or system routes that
they're
are
not
just there. Yeah. Like, I mean, okay, the raw slash, that's fine. Like, that's just okay. But the rest we prefix it with like underscore or something like that.
Yeah, we could think about that. I mean, in particular, like we could merge health and this together and just like get our Kubernetes Act in the sort of like, and I actually think the /IPFS prefix is kind of nice. But the only thing that I've been wondering there is like, should we be adding QFS to the front of that, just to say, then we could do QFS, S3, and say, and this would just be your raw file accessor patterns for like, I just want to get this file from a place, which is what the IPFS prefix is doing for us with the IPFS subsystem. But it's only accessible through QFS.
Regarding health, we cannot really get rid of it because like Kubernetes and GCP are weird about it, and they literally require you to have a fixed route called health on a couple services that we have.
And if that's true for us, then it's going to be true for anybody running query
Yeah.
in that context. So we should have it the same way that we have a body.csv. Like, I mean, we may have that problem, but we use common technologies, and so others will. So we'll keep it. I think web UI is a giant conversation for a later date, but yeah, I don't know. How do others feel about this? So we can get rid of these two. We've agreed that they move into DS push and DS pull. Do we agree on that? Asmir, did you agree on that?
Yep.
Cool. I heard no complaints on the working directory stuff. Cool, we're into that.
Technically, what changed is not using the working directory. It's getting the same output as status, but for something in history.
Mhm.
So that could move to DS.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's looking at your history.
So weird. And then I think that also, like, as part of this practice, like, again, putting yourself in the shoes of somebody reading this documentation website that does not yet exist from day one, the idea that we have DS what changed and changes. I looked at that while I was working on this. I'm like, that's bad. We need to fix that.
So what are they? Just
what changed is returning the data of which components were modified, which stayed the same, and which were added or removed. So it's a very, very tiny response used for desktop to show the green red dots. Yeah.
I mean, is it simple enough to change it to which changed?
Yeah, or like, so this is where we took the inspiration from, is like the git actually has a super buried subcommand called what changed that shows you it. So normally if you just do query or git log, you're going to get just the log of your that describes in human words what's going to happen. If you do query log, very similar. Oh yeah, I have to log a thing. But if you do get what changed, you get the files that were changed, which is what powers our sidebar little dots. And so you have these modifieds, deleteds, and updateds.
Yeah, I think the UX thought is like a longer, harder to spell, harder to type word is scarier, so therefore, more plumbing. Because yeah, what changed? Like the name can be changed to really anything. It's just use, it's not a thing a user's probably going to type. It's something that is like application level.
Yeah. And so I think we should keep with that theme of, I think it needs to be renamed to something that doesn't use the word changed, but should be longer, as you said, Dustin, because it's not really, it's a bit plumbing-y. Yeah, what happened? What's the matter?
Why not like just status? I know it's like short and sweet, but it's also producing short and sweet responses. And now that it's under DS, it's different from like what's under working directory.
So we have a working directory status and a DS status?
Feels like component status.
I was also
what it's reporting.
I was also I think this is written like talked about somewhere, but like using status to talk about like saves that are currently in progress. Like there could be more about status than just like a change at a single version.
That's a really good point. And that actually, Dustin, is probably, maybe we don't want to be prefixing status like this for that reason.
I don't know. Yeah.
But let's put that to the side for a second. So I think I agree that I don't know. I think status would be nice. I think it's an overloaded term.
It's also like, it's weird to talk like status usually means like current status.
Yeah.
Where we're talking here about like historical modifications that happened at an old a specific commit, specific version. Could be DS commit to show info about a commit. I don't know.
Doesn't it show the full log? Do we have this on? Yeah.
I don't think so. I think it's just like modified, added, removed at a single. Oh yeah, it needs a reference. It's usually a reference with a full path.
Right.
If not, yeah, I think it just does what you had at head. So that should be showing what changed at the most recent commit.
You
Yeah.
removed a transform and added a README at the same time.
Hmm. I too like to live dangerously.
Hmm.
That happens whenever you run a manual change in this system, because this is from the old paradigm where we would track a transform as existing when we didn't have the apply command.
Hmm.
This data set is the wrong data set to use for demos.
Very spicy.
It's
Hard mode.
hard mode. Go ahead.
Component
Dan.
status, and it's long, it's specific enough, and heck it. I don't know.
I like it.
I like component status.
I do too. Anyone disagree?
It's ugly if
So-
it gets the job done.
It's so funny because that's the language we use to describe it on the front end.
Really?
Yeah, component status.
Perfect. There it is. We've
Full
meant
circle.
to, yeah, we've meant to end up here all along. This is perfect. Thank you, Casey, for settling the debate. Okay, so temperature check, rather than getting totally bogged down on every little nitpicky bit. How do we feel about this DS grouping? I think this is the most contentious thing. Do we feel like we're adding, like we're making it easier to understand our API with these?
I definitely like it more. I mean, the only thing that sticks out a little to me is unpack, for reasons mentioned before, that it's, I don't know, I feel like it should be swept under a rug somewhere, but yeah, I like this better than before.
Is Unpack even used at all in any like of our clients?
If you have desktop and you drag and drop a zip file into it, I
Okay,
believe
yeah.
it uses
Makes
unpack. Yeah, it uses unpack to figure out which files it contains before showing the UI for the next step.
Yeah, you need a way to communicate like from the desktop client to the query node.
Yeah, just keeping that, the whole reason it exists is to keep that logic in the Go code base, and we don't write it in JavaScript. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, also can get really big, so we want to do that on the Go side anyways, because yeah, browsers. Okay, so then I think this is a good start. I want to just close out this. Oh no, I have to jet. This is, oh man. Okay, this has been a productive conversation. So I think the way we're going to sort of pull this to the ground, we're all agreed that getting the API cleaned up and documented like this with an open API spec is the big blocker to releasing 0.10.0. I think that's going to be the thing we put on the front of the tin. It says, hey, let's do this. Yeah, okay, so let's do that. And I have two places where I'd like to track where this happens, or track the progress on this, specifically around consensus for the specification of this API. So we've talked a bunch today. I'm going to fold in the changes we talked about here. But I have this PR that updates, specifically all it changes is the Open API 3 YAML doc to bring it up to speed. This has been a lot of work that I've often asked others to do. I'm going to try and do the work myself this time. But one of the other things that it does is we are mapping operation IDs to the actual dispatch method calls so that you can see directly as programmers what is supposed to be calling what as we evaluate this. And so each of these, I did a bunch of work a little while ago, create auth tokens. So these are actually up to date. Yeah, it's got a bunch of work to do here, but that's what I'm hoping to review with this PR, PR number 1697. And then if we look at the way that we want to test this, because I think that at the same time, we talk a lot about how the end-to-end tests have been in desktop have been catching a lot of problems. I think we need to move a lot of the insight down as we work on Querymatic. And so I've been working on a new set of test suites for the API that are driven with JSON files. And I think the reason for this is when we went to do the JSON schema spec, it was really nice to be able to go to their Python code base, pull out all their JSON test files and write a Go test runner and be able to use that as the API contract test. And so this PR proposes introducing that mechanism. So using our assert pattern where we define a spec package. The spec package just contains one function that is basically just assert this specification. And then it contains a bunch of JSON files that should be a little easier to read and a little divorced from the Go code base, where it's like, hey, I'm going to do a post to save with this header, and then I'm going to expect to get this response code back and this application type. And you can get as specific or unspecific as you want. And these things all happen in order. So it calls this, then this, then this. And this is a test of the working directory thing. So these become very integration testy, should be readable by others, and it should be much easier to sort of like write something that actually asserts that these things work the way that they should. So I've got those two up for proposal. I'm going to update the documentation one. I'm going to move all of this into the 0.10.0 planning milestone. We're going to burn this thing down. We're going to get this API up to speed. And once these contract tests pass, we're going to cut 0.10.0. Sound good? Sick.
Are we putting this into the doc site? Because I think we did some stuff on that last summer that never quite made it in.
Exactly. Yeah. And so this PR is updating the thing that would go into the doc site with the to reflect the new thing.
Perfect.
Last thing I want to do, because it's the end of a sprint, I think I want to start a new tradition. I'm going to go to this projects thing because we didn't do this last sprint. We have 70 things in the done column. Congratulations, everybody. You've been doing a lot of work. I'm going to archive all cards. Whammy. Good job, everybody. Lots of stuff done. All right. Thank you. Have a lovely weekend.